Chapter 18. Great Glaciers. Later, they waved a sad goodbye to Solongo and took off across the silent sea towards the third continent. Harriet looked ahead, a huge smile illuminating her face. As of this moment, I'm somewhere I've never been before. She turned to Arthur beside her. Thrilling, isn't it? Arthur knew how she felt. He was leaving the human world behind, going where Dad had stepped into the unknown. It was the closest he'd felt to his father, since he'd left for the expedition. Harriet estimated 10 days to cross the silent sea. By the third day, the sea was moody, with waves as high as the Longtown Chronicle Tower. Arthur couldn't believe anyone had attempted to sail to the third continent on a sea-bound ship. The crew carried on through the relentless wind and driving rain, doing their best to keep dry below deck whenever they could. But mostly it was all hands on deck to keep the ship from being blown off course. Arthur was on bailing duty, sweeping the build-up of water towards the drains. It wasn't the easiest task for him, as relentless, one-handed sweeping soon made his arm ache. So he'd managed to clamp his iron arm around the broom, which worked better. There was a rare break in the wind, although the rain was unforgiving. He caught sight of a dark shape coming towards them. He paused. "Ahoy there," Harriet called. There was an inaudible call back. Arthur rushed to the bow. It was the Firebird. One balloon was deflated, and her mast was bent. The stricken vessel steered close to the Aurora, where they could see a man holding a brass megaphone. He shouted, "We're heading back. Our mast has fractured, and we've already used half our fuel fighting the wind. Turn back if you know what's good for you and the crew." "A wise choice by the look of your ship, Captain," Harriet shouted back as they chugged past. "Thank you for your concern, but we're still a stout ship and crew. There's plenty of life in us yet. Travel safe." "Only the Victorious between us and the South Polaris. Then," Welby said with a broad smile. They carried on, day after day, battling vicious winds, some days going full steam ahead just to stay still. On the 12th day, the weather had calmed, and Felicity was taking a break from preparing dinner because her feet ached so terribly. She had to get her weight off them for the afternoon. She had left Arthur in charge of preparing her special galley stew, which they ate every 5 days, so he knew how to prepare it with his eyes shut. He was chopping potatoes on his spike board when he heard the rumble of feet on wooden floorboards directly above him. Arthur was desperate to run and see what was going on, but the gallery couldn't be left unattended if the stove was lit. As Felicity reminded him often, fire and wooden flying ships don't mix unless you want a quick descent. Shutting down the valves and starving the fire of oxygen took time. He impatiently tapped his iron arm until the flame went out, before dashing out of the door, along the corridor, and up the stairs to the deck. When he reached above, the crew were all staring over the side of the ship, pointing. The Aurora had descended to a short distance above the now calm waves. Blocks of ice as tall as a great building of uptown Longtown dotted across the sea, luminous blue in the late afternoon light. All of a sudden, something great and dark rose from the water between two icebergs, and a huge chuff of water sprayed into the air. The creature arched its huge body slowly, then submerged again. Morley jumped beside him, tugging his arm. "Artie, look, aren't they amazing?" Then a group of 4 rose together, 2 large and 2 smaller. He had never seen such enormous creatures. The scene was breathtaking. "It's a family," he said. 2 wrinkled hands grasped the edge of the ship beside Arthur. "They're called Great Glaciers. and their whales, the largest creature in the world. Welby's white hair had become longer and less perfect throughout the journey. He even had a bit of a beard growing, which Arthur thought suited him. He looked like an original explorer from the illustrations in Exploring in the Second Age. They were almost hunted out of existence. "Are there people of the second continent?" Arthur asked. They seemed so in touch with nature and animals there, he couldn't imagine it. No, by the first. The great glaciers weren't always this far south. They were common in the Coldham Sea and further north. But the body of a glacier fetched a high price in Longtown. Great animals were slaughtered just so some uptowner could show off a whale-skin clutch at a dinner party, or someone like Aurora Vane would have luminous skin with the fine oils derived from the blubber. So they stay here where the rough seas keep them safe, as much as they can, but they need to travel to warmer waters to feed when it is the harshest winter. The whale should hunt the humans and see how they like it, Morley said. Indeed, Welby laughed. It was lovely to see his serious mask drop for a moment before he resumed his orderly tone. Now, back to work. There's much to do. This isn't a tea party, you know, no matter what Miss Wiggity says. Harriet approached Welby, holding the temperature reader attached to her belt. It's dropped several degrees in the past chime, and at night it will plunge, which means we're nearly at the third continent. Miss Wiggity, I want you to go straight to the stores and hand out the warm clothes we picked up in the Citadel. The cold will sink its chilled teeth straight into our bones if we stay in these any longer. She called to the crew to form a queue in the gallery corridor and get their new clothes, while Arthur rushed down to relight the stove. 5 minutes later, Arthur hurriedly slopped extra-large portions of stew into overfilling bowls and handed them to the crew, who ate quickly before leaving to dress in their new kit. As Arthur was clearing up, Harriet arrived back. "I've brought you your new clothes." She put the huge pile of fur and oilskins on the table. Arthur carried the bundle back to his cabin to change. Putting on the furs and oilskins was awkward, and he wished he had Morley there to help. The buttons were in unfamiliar places and stiff, so were tricky to do one-handed, let alone getting the smock jacket over his iron arm. He knew it would be far simpler to take them off, but he wanted to make sure he could still wear it, as it was bound to be useful as they continued in the third continent. It was too awkward to force his iron arm through, so he pushed his feet into the fur boots and went back to the gallery. He secured the jacket into his chopping clamp and sliced through the material of the arm with Felicity's sharpest knife. His iron arm eased through the sleeve hole, fitting snugly. By the time he'd finished, his cheeks were bright crimson with the effort. So he hurried to the deck, where he could slap off wind was a welcome relief. The last sliver of sunlight evaporated as the clouds above met. "It's dropped 5 degrees in 10 minutes, Morley said, shivering in the dark. Snow drifted from above, soft and light. It fluttered down, icing the ship and the crew. We need everyone scraping. If the ice forms on the ship and the wings, it'll weigh us down too much," Welby called out. By evening, the temperature dropped again, and Harriet ordered a shift pattern for clearing the snow through the night and sent everyone else below deck to get some sleep, while she and Welby took turns navigating the ship and sleeping. Even inside, the Aurora seemed to be frosting over, and the woodwork creaked and strained. Parthena and Queenie had formed a truce and were below deck, snuggled together, keeping warm with everyone else. Keen to see the snow again, Arthur volunteered for the early shift and woke at dawn. He could only remember it snowing a few times in Longtown, and nothing on this scale. He found a metal flask and made tea to take to Harriet on the deck. At the hatch, the ice wind took its breath away. Arthur peered through and watched Harriet at the wheel, steering the Aurora onwards. Her silhouette was utterly still, strong as if nothing could knock her from her position. Her mop of unstyled hair danced in the wind, and her gaze was fixed ahead. He crossed the deck and passed her the flask. "Thank you." The snow eased. "Look," she pointed to the horizon. Ahead, an endless white carpet spread across the landscape, broken by thousands of ice-topped hills stretching from east to west and glimpses of greenery. Harriet passed him the binoscope. "It's quite something, isn't it?" The stretch of white was crisp and fresh, every edge sharp and defined. Arthur took a large breath, and crystals cold filled his lungs. The sea below was speckled with thousands of ice chunks lapping into the frozen shore. In the far distance, the undulations petered out. "Is that the everlasting forest?" "Yes, I believe so, but we won't reach that for some time." "Well, set down on the coast in the bay, change the water and check everything is in order before we embark on crossing further. Porridge for breakfast, and let's break open a jar of Batzerig's best honey." He rushed below in helped Felicity as the crew woke and began their duties. Seeing how eager he was to see more of the third continent, Felicity said she should take care of breakfast and make sweet honey tea to combat the cold. She let him off his duties to return to the deck. Parthena flew onto his iron arm and butted her head to his cheek. "I agree, Parthena," said Arthur. "It's amazing here." Then she took flight into the clear morning sky. Arthur watched her through the binoscope, her great white wings elegantly working with the undulations of the wind. They had descended and were coming in to land in the bay when Parthena circled the ship and made a succession of screeches. "What the grinding grommets has got into her," he said. There was the rumble of engines as the Victorious took flight from the shore of the third continent. Harriet took the binoscope and looked through. "It's all right, Arthur. We predicted we'd catch them up around here. It's a little sooner than expected, but that's a good thing. We'll land, change the water supply, and then take straight off again. The engines will be on half power to conserve fuel, so this is where we gain an advantage." She passed Arthur the binoscope. As he looked through, he saw a flash of silver. He chased it with his glaze. It was a strange flying silver insect. "Look," he pointed. "What's that doing all the way out here?" But when he passed the binoscope back to Harriet, it had gone. "Maybe it was just a reflection on the glass," she said. But he wasn't certain that it was. End of chapter 18. Some vocabulary from the chapter. Page 184. Illuminating. Illuminating. The meaning in this context: to shine light on it and to make it brighter and more visible. On page 184 also. Estimated. Estimated. The meaning in this context: an approximate calculation or judgment of the value, number, quantity or extent of something. On page 185, bailing, meaning to remove water from a boat using a container. On page 185, inaudible, inaudible, meaning unable to be heard. On page 187, descended, descended, meaning move or fall downwards. And on page 192, embark, embark, meaning to go on board a vehicle for transportation. The end.